When a despised Syrian slave attempted to use a woman's blood to leverage the political landscape of Rome, everyone thought it was an absolute joke. In the highly anticipated Gladiator arena, the rules were altered at the last minute, and a desperate death trap had been set. But the brutal counterkill that unfolded next on the sands would completely tear away the hypocritical mask of this city.
This day!
This ending will absolutely send chills down your spine. Immediately following the undercurrents of the ambush in the previous episode, we are dragged straight into the darkest vortex of power in Capua. Ashur, the Syrian who once crawled and fought his way through the arena, thought that by taking credit for repelling the Cilician pirates and saving Senator Gabinius' wife and daughter, he could firmly establish his foothold in Capua. But he soon discovered that he was nothing more than a pawn to be manipulated at will. Before the morning breeze could even blow away the stench of blood in the mansion, Caesar arrived uninvited, bringing with him a brutally cruel truth.
Did you truly hold the gods would smile upon one as base as you, absent guided hand beyond whim of divinity?
The Cilicians. They stood your men?
Those so-called Cilician pirates were, in fact, Caesar's own men, in disguise. All of this was an elaborate scheme orchestrated by Caesar and Crassus, who was stationed just outside Rome, with the sole purpose of making Senator Gabinius owe them a favor, thereby forcing him to defect from Pompey's faction and support Crassus instead. Caesar ruthlessly mocked Ashur's smugness and dominantly took control of the situation. Not only that, but to further curry favor with Gabinius, Caesar even forcibly commandeered Ashur's shabby mansion to host the Freedmen's Banquet on the eve of the upcoming Apollonian Games.
Your will. My hands.
But there is a detail here that many people overlooked. The reason Caesar chose to host the banquet at Ashur's mansion was not because it was luxurious. On the contrary, it was an act of extreme political humiliation. He wanted to trample Ashur, this Syrian who had just gained a little bit of prestige, back into the mud in front of all the elites of Capua. As preparations for the banquet began, Caesar's wife, Cornelia, arrogantly moved into the mansion as if she were its true mistress. Ashur tried to find even a shred of dignity in this family mansion that bore his own name, but all he received was even more brutal suppression. In the room, Caesar pinned Ashur down as effortlessly as crushing an ant, leaving behind a suffocating warning.
Know your place, Syrian, and become intimate with mine. When I enter a room, you shall hail me not as a matched equal, but as God on Mount.
This scene actually hints at the despairing barriers of the Roman class system. No matter how much money a slave or a gladiator earns, in the eyes of true Roman nobles, he will always be nothing more than a speaking tool. However, Ashur was absolutely not a man who would just sit and wait for death. On the night of the banquet, the luminaries of Capua gathered, and various gladiator owners showed off the strongest muscles of their men. The house of Proculus brought the fearsome Ferox brothers, attempting to awe the entire crowd with absolute power. But when it was the house of Ashur's turn to present their prime champion, the whole room fell dead silent for a moment, followed by an eruption of deafening laughter. What Ashur brought out was not some muscular brute, but a Nubian woman from the savage lands of Kush, Achillia.
Behold! Achillia, the goddess of death.
The magistrates and nobles felt this was a tremendous offense, but Ashur did not care about their mockery at all. He knew very well that what the audience needed most was a spectacle, and a woman facing fully armed, bloodthirsty beasts on the sands was the ultimate spectacle never before seen in the Roman Republic. The next day, the Apollonian Games kicked off amidst sky-shattering cheers. Tarchon, a young Thracian fighter under Ashur, performed exceptionally well in the preliminary matches, using agile cover to kill a heavily shielded gladiator and securing a victorious start for the House of Ashur. But that was merely an appetizer. Everyone's eyes were focused on the upcoming Primus match. To punish Ashur for acting on his own, Caesar secretly colluded with the magistrate to alter the match arrangements at the last minute. The originally evenly matched opponent was swapped out, and Achillia was forced to face the ace gladiator of the House of Proculus, who was not only massive in size, but also heavily armed. Caesar intended to use the woman's tragic death to appease the noble's dissatisfaction and strangle Ashur's ambition, while the director cleverly utilized visual contrast to present the scene. Achillia appeared incredibly petite in front of that giant Roman gladiator. With almost every incoming attack posing a deadly threat. The Roman elites in the stands roared with bloodthirsty madness, demanding that she be eaten alive and torn apart. But Achillia remembered her trainer's instructions. Speed was her only advantage. The entire city of Capua erupted. The crowds no longer mocked her. Instead, they frantically chanted the name Achillia. This slaughter, which was supposed to be a political execution, was forcefully turned into an epic miracle by Ashur and Achillia. However, the price of victory was extremely tragic. Achillia was severely wounded, collapsing in a pool of blood, her life hanging by a thread. After the carnival of the arena faded, what was left for Ashur was endless anxiety. Even though Achillia survived, her wounds were severely infected, and she could breathe her last at any moment. Without her, the newly established prestige of the House of Ashur would burst instantly like a bubble. This was no longer just a matter of Achillia's personal life or death, but a crisis of survival for the entire house. In order to save this last cash cow, Ashur had to lower his pride and seek help from his rival, another gladiator owner named Oppator, to borrow his Greek-speaking slave doctor, who was highly skilled in medicine. Meanwhile, the political struggles inside Ashur's mansion did not cease in the slightest, despite the conclusion of the arena games. Caesar's wife Cornelia continued to play the role of the aloof queen. Not only did she boss Ashur's slaves around at will, but she was also secretly plotting a sinister political marriage. She set her sights on Senator Gabinius's recently widowed daughter, Viridia, attempting to use sweet words to betroth her to Caesar's ally, Quintus. This hidden plotline was particularly lethal. On the surface, Cornelia was discussing a widow's future with Viridia, but in reality she was executing Crassus and Caesar's core strategy of stripping Pompey's political resources. If this marriage succeeded, the Gabinius family would be thoroughly tied to Caesar's chariot. However, Ashur would never let Caesar get what he wanted. He leveraged the face that Achillia had previously won for Gabinius on the sands to secretly meet with this stubborn senator. Ashur hit the nail on the head by pointing out that Cornelia's proposal was nothing more than an attempt to turn Viridia into a pathetic pawn on Caesar's chessboard. Ultimately, Gabinius took Ashur's advice and decisively rejected this marriage of ulterior motives. Just as Ashur was overwhelmed trying to balance politics, an even bigger ticking time bomb was counting down in the dark alleys of Capua. Oppator, the gladiator owner who lent out the doctor, had actually uncovered the truth in secret. He discovered that the so-called Cilician pirate attack was entirely directed and staged by Caesar himself. Oppator knew very well that in this Roman political circle that treated human life like dirt, knowing too many of Caesar's secrets would only lead to a dead end. He decided to abandon everything in Capua and flee to Sicily, but he did not want to leave alone. Oppator had an extremely deep, even obsessive affection for Salvius, the old trainer under Ashur. To take his beloved trainer Salvius with him, Oppator offered Ashur a sky-high price.
My villa, and Ludus, and all men contained within in exchange for but one of yours.
Faced with this massive windfall of assets, Ashur remained seemingly unfazed on the surface, even pretending to reluctantly accept the deal. To stall Oppator, Ashur immediately organized an internal selection tournament upon returning to his school, nominally to choose an acting champion, while Achillia was severely injured. On the training ground covered with coarse sand, the young and aggressive Tarchon engaged in a desperate fight to the death with the experienced Celadus. Ultimately, the calmer and more ruthless Celadus seized a flaw and won this brutal duel. But this was exactly where most people were deceived. Ashur did not follow common sense by making the victorious Celadus the champion of the house. Instead, he made a decision in public that shocked everyone.
Tarkhan shall stand as champion until such day Achillia returns to form.
See, Calidus elevated the position of Doctore.
This seemingly illogical move was, in fact, a perfect poisoned arrow fired by Ashur. As night completely fell, Opater was anxiously packing expensive luggage in his mansion, full of joy, thinking he had traded his entire fortune for his lover's freedom and a lifeline for his safe escape from Capua. However, the person who pushed open the door and walked in was not the old trainer he had been yearning for day and night, but the most cold-blooded killer under Ashur. The smile on Opater's face froze instantly, and he finally realized that he had been completely played by that Syrian. This textbook example of a double cross showcased the purest viper nature deep in Ashur's bones. On the other hand, the old trainer, who had been full of hope for the future, made an extremely uncharacteristic move upon learning that Achillia was still in a feverish coma. This hardened man, who had spent his life entrenched in slaughter and betrayal and had long lost his faith in the gods, actually made a humble sacrifice to pray for the woman's recovery, holding a darkly ironic metaphor. While lies and schemes ran rampant in the city of Capua, the only true miracle manifested on a slave at the very bottom. Perhaps the gods answered a desperate plea, or perhaps the goddess of death's will transcended the limits of the flesh. After hovering on the edge of life and death for several days and nights, a faint gasp echoed within the dim cell. Achillia slowly opened her eyes. Looking at the old trainer guarding by her side, she declared in a weak yet incredibly resolute voice, Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next video.